Hello there and welcome to our look at what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me, KIRAN STACEY from the Financial Times, and Miranda Green, who's the editor of the online school news service The Day and the former press secretary of a certain Mr. Ashdown. It's great to have you both with us. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Let's start with a look at the front pages. And the Financial Times is carrying a photograph of 8-year-old Martin Richard, who was killed in the Boston bombing while waiting at the finish line. The Daily Express front page goes on the large-scale security operation deployed along the route of Baroness Thatcher's funeral procession. Who planted the bombs in Boston? That's the question posed on the front page of The Guardian. The Daily Telegraph has a striking image of Baroness Thatcher's coffin, and it's also reporting on the British family whose son was killed in the Boston blasts. The whole of the front page of the Daily Mail is devoted to that same image of Baroness Thatcher's coffin draped in the Union Jack. Near her journey's end is their caption there. And the Times reports on the FBI's search for the culprits behind the Boston bombings, featuring the photograph of the British family that was so tragically caught up there. On the front page of the Mirror, the coach crash in the French Alps in which the British driver was killed and 4 other UK tourists were badly injured. And a touching tribute to 8-year-old Martin Richard and his family. Another paper headlining there the tragedy of the Boston bombings. Starting, Miranda, with the Times, and I suppose this is the photograph, one of the photographs of the family there, torn apart by what happened, and bringing home this story to British readers.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, all of the papers who've gone with this story big on page 1 have used something to do with this poor little boy, 8 years old, who was killed in the attack. And this photograph of the whole family, which the Times has used, I think so far they seem to be the only paper that's actually gone with this group shot, which is obviously not of them at the marathon, but just shows them as a united family before they were involved in this awful atrocity. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. You know, they've lost their son, but also the mother is in the hospital with a serious brain injury. The little girl has lost a leg. And only the father and the other son have escaped unhurt. And, you know, he's released a very upsetting statement saying, you know, thank you all for praying for my family. But so really this family has become the sort of focal point for a lot of the coverage, because I think a lot of us can identify with that family on a normal family day out, subject to this horrible attack. But actually the story itself focuses very much on the investigation, and they go with this idea that the CCTV footage might give important clues as to who's actually behind it.
Yeah, I mean, KIRAN, I was talking to Rod Sharp, our correspondent at Boston General Hospital last night, and he was saying that he spoke to doctors who had already amputated. This was about 3 or 4 hours after the event. They'd already severed 8 limbs. Yeah, as a result of what happened. And the FBI are now saying that this thing was, it was packed with nails, little bullets that you use in little sort of BB guns, they call it, BB pellets. Clearly, not only did this person or these people who planted these devices wanted to kill, they wanted to maim as well.
It looks like it, yeah. We are now starting to get some of these details about exactly what happened. We think they were placed in black backpacks low down to the ground. And as you say, these were pellets, these were little nails. You know, they really were aimed at, or at least they did, we don't know how much they were aimed at, but they did hurt a lot of people in their lower limbs, which is why we saw so many amputations. I mean, you mentioned 8 in one hospital. The Guardian, that we're going to come to later, mentions 4 in another. And of course, people will focus on the deaths. Well, they'll talk about these 3 people who've died, but as Miranda says, there's 176 now is the estimate of the number of people injured, and this will rip apart families. Not just those who were killed, but those who've had life-changing injuries. And it does look absolutely horrific. It also looks very low budget. You know, this is not the work of sophisticated, as far as we can tell, sophisticated international network of terrorists. This looks like homemade bombs, but people who don't quite know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, Miranda, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Was this, you know, the result of someone with some grudge against the federal government or whatever, some kind of homegrown terrorist, or was this, you know, an international plot?
Well, it's very interesting because although we've now this evening had a very significant formal press conference, you know, and we've also had the President speaking about the tragedy, they've made it absolutely clear that they consider anything beyond these details that we've been talking about what kind of bombs they might be, as pure speculation, because they don't really know. Is it domestic terrorism? Is it one of these extremist individuals or groups? Is it an Oklahoma bomb equivalent? Or is it, in fact, some sort of international terrorist attack? The problem is, though, that this sort of attack on ordinary people, on a civilian target, not a government target, bears the hallmarks of international terrorism, not of a domestic attack. But if what you want to do is create maximum mayhem, maximum panic, anyone with whatever their grudge these days knows this is the way to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, a high-profile event like the Boston Marathon, the Independent, of course, carrying the picture there also of little Martin Richard. The
Independent, interestingly, also names Crystal Campbell. This is the first paper that I've seen to name a second victim, person who was killed. Crystal Campbell, 29, who was a restaurant manager. So we are now starting to find out a little bit more about this.
Yeah, and the third person that died apparently was a student at Boston University. Right. The name hasn't been revealed yet. The family haven't been informed. But it's the stories and the lives behind the sort of captions and the pictures that really bring it home to any viewer here and to anyone reading this. He was 8 years old. His father liked to run marathons. His family loved watching. Today he's dead, Miranda.
Well, the thing is also, in a sense, these photographs that we're looking at tonight have much more impact than the pictures of the scene itself, don't you think? Yeah. I mean, what was interesting looking at the papers this morning is that you know there was a lot of of amateur shot footage of the scene itself. Obviously, these days everyone's sending in their film and their shots from the scene made on their smartphones, etc. But actually, this is much more affecting. These photographs taken before the attack.
That's true. I mean, one of the things actually I was surprised to see last night, and I actually found quite affecting, was the footage you had of right up close to the bomb. And of course, one of the reasons for that is this was an event that was being televised, and there were lots of people filming it right up the finish line. You want to video your friends as they come past the finish line. And there was that one clip that I saw doing the rounds of really the exact moment when it happened, and this person kind of ran towards whatever was going on, and you saw that those immediate moments after the attack, people hauling bits of debris off other people, suddenly rushing towards the victims. And it's that glimpse of an event that you don't usually get. I mean, we often hear eyewitness accounts, but you don't see it in that visceral detail.
But you see, again, this is also why it's an amazing target for a terrorist to make maximum impact. You've got not only have you got the maximum press of people, you've got all the television cameras instantly there. And yet you've magnified your attack around the world instantly.
Indeed, and yet no one has claimed responsibility. Which seems really strange.
What were they trying to achieve? You know, if they wanted to get a cause out there, why don't we know about it? It's really strange.
Well, this is why I think that's why there's a lot of speculation about domestic terrorism, because certainly in the UK we found that sort of hate crime type extreme far-right attacks do tend to use this homemade explosive device packed with metal because it causes maximum maiming.
And that's what happened in the Soho Nail bombs.
Exactly, that's exactly the example I was thinking of,
OK, moving on to the Daily Mail, and a very striking image on the front page there, full colour, near her journey's end. The coffin of Baroness Thatcher there before the funeral procession tomorrow, Kieran.
Yeah, well, I was actually there, not in the chapel itself, but just outside today on a couple of occasions. And it's strange, tomorrow we're going to get this huge event. There's going to be 700 armed services personnel. There's going to be 4,000 police officers, we're told. People are going to be lining the streets. And today was actually a relatively low-key moment. The coffin came in. Nobody really knew when it turned up. It just suddenly was there. And there were a few friends and family stood outside, and actually tourists were coming in and out of Westminster Hall, where this chapel is, almost oblivious to the fact that Margaret Thatcher's body was just there. And a couple of the papers point out quite poignantly that as she was there, her memory was still being argued about in the chamber above, because we had this slightly strange thing very late on tonight where George Galloway and a few other MPs decided they didn't like the idea of Parliament being stopped tomorrow for her funeral. Nobody else really supported them, but still she's having, her body's there and she's being argued over in the chamber above.
It's terribly interesting, isn't it? Because you've got it presented in a newspaper like the Daily Mail as a moment of national unity, but it actually isn't quite like that. And obviously the debate that's been going on today in the Commons about what should Big Ben really be stopped for this funeral? Should PMQs really be stopped for the leader of one political party rather than for Winston Churchill, Big Ben, was stopped for his funeral. He was a wartime coalition leader.
Well, George Galloway seemed to understand that as well. He was saying today, he made we'd all be speaking German if it wasn't for Mr. Churchill, he suggested.
Probably the first Conservative George Galloway's ever been.
Yes, quite. I'm sure Winston Churchill will be delighted wherever he is to have gained the
we've got Mr. Galloway behind him.
That's right.
The Daily Express.
Make all the difference.
Yeah, Daily Express. I mean, talking about the huge security that's going to be mounted as a result of that funeral procession tomorrow. 4,000 police guard Maggie Coffin as well. And of course, with what happened in Boston, Miranda, I mean, heightened security potentially as well now. Yeah, very, very important to get this right. But of course, the police in London have a lot of experience over many years of dealing with the terrorist threat because of the inheritance of the Northern Irish export of terrorism to mainland UK over many years. And also, there's the London Marathon on Sunday, as we've mentioned. So they've got to deal with this enormous state occasion tomorrow, and then the marathon on Sunday. So a big week for the Met and for all the security services. But I do think it's interesting, actually, the Daily Express. They've also gone back to the Madeleine McCann story on their front page, which is interesting, isn't it? Because there's a question about the paper's audiences and the readerships now, 1 week on.
Not even 1 week on,
death.
one day on, papers were saying that they were not selling as well. A, as they expected to, and B, as before Margaret Thatcher died. Obviously, most papers thought, well, this is a big moment, we'll do lots and lots of coverage, we'll put it on the front page, we'll have all our columnists talk about her memory. Readers said, no thanks. They would just not been going for it. So we've started to see, exactly as Miranda says, papers going back to their staples that they know are going to pull in readers. The ones that their
particular readers will still go to them for.
That's very interesting. Hence
putting
the thematic picture there on the front of the Express. Moving on to the Financial Times, the IMF urges Mr. Osborne to adopt Plan B. Now, KIRAN, is he going to listen to the IMF? I suspect not, and I'm no expert.
He's definitely not. He's not going to listen to the IMF, he's not going to listen to Ed Balls, he's not going to listen to Vince Cable even now, kind of coming out and pretty much calling for Plan B.
Miranda Sharp and take a breath there.
No, he's going to plough on with what he calls Plan A. It's worth bearing in mind, of course, Plan A isn't quite what we thought it was going to be in the first place.
Indeed.
We thought it was going to be 4 years of cuts finishing in 2014. It's not now, it's going to be 2017, 2018, we've actually seen government spending rise because of the amount we're now spending on benefits. Departmental cuts are the ones that are still continuing. And yeah, he'll stick with this. This is a pretty damaging report, however, by the IMF. This is the first time this very respected international body has come out and said, not only do we have worries about UK growth, we actually think George Osborne should change his mind. Lots of people out there go, oh yes, we're a bit worried, but we're not sure what to do. IMF seems to be saying, time for Plan B. Yeah.
It is really interesting. I think it's a very significant intervention because it will be such a boost for the Labour Party's constant argument on this. But on the other hand, it is worth noting that over the last few days there have actually been some quite interesting business surveys that have said the opposite and have been much more optimistic about growth next year. So, the proof of the pudding.
All right. The Daily Mirror, going back to sort of papers perhaps trying to keep the Baroness Thatcher procession tomorrow off the front page. The Daily Mirror leading on that coach crash in the Alps there. But interestingly, we were talking about the IMF and perhaps their report being a boon for the Labour Party. But this suggestion here in the Express is that Mr. Miliband slumps to new low with voters, KIRAN.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's taking some to get to a new low, because he started low and he's gone even lower. It doesn't look good for Ed Miliband. The party's still ahead in the polls. We should point out Labour's about, according to this poll, about six points ahead, but that's not really where they should be right now. And the other point of this story is that Ed Miliband's going to go into what I think the paper calls a tense showdown with Tony Blair. Tony Blair and a lot of his allies have been criticising Ed recently. It seems like very strange timing to me. I mean, it feels like Labour have started to settle, to kind of get the upper hand. People are very unsure about the government's economic programme, and suddenly we had all these Blairites coming out and attacking the leadership.
So, Miranda, what's going on? What's going on here?
Well, the main warning that seems to be coming out from the Blair camp and the people who still surround the former leader, who, let's not forget, was almost as successful electorally as Mrs.
Thatcher, exactly, and it will help sow the seeds, you were telling me a little bit earlier, Kieran, for all the events tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll leave it there. But Miranda, just explain why Mr. Miliband is slumping like this.
Well, what Mr. Blair and the people around him have argued is that Ed Miliband is appealing too much to core Labour supporters, and that's never a strategy that will win you a general election. So saying what your own people want to hear, i.e. preaching to the converted in politics, is not the way to convince enough voters to actually win a majority in the Commons next time. So they're warning Ed Miliband, you're turning Labour into the party of opposition. Now, you could possibly be doing that very well. You could argue that they're being effective on their opposition messages, but it's not enough. You want to win an election, 6 points at this stage, it's not enough.
I'm just not sure that, I mean, Tony Blair won 3 elections a long time ago, and things are different now.
OK, all right. Kieran, Miranda, it's great to have you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciated. Do join us tomorrow at 10:30 for another look at the papers. Stay with us here on BBC News Now, because now it's time for Sports.
Hello there.